Okay, we're going to be jumping right into chapter 6, which is called Basics of Creation. And they first start talking in this chapter about the construction planes, which would be here, and of course the 0, 0 coordinates that you need to be familiar with. We're going to be largely working over here with these particular objects. And we start out talking about standard primitives, which just about everything is made out of one of these standard primitives. Go here and you think about every drawing that you've ever done is probably a form of a box, a cone, a cylinder, a pyramid. Not much more than that. That represents just about everything. You know, when they start teaching you how to draw, those are the ones. Those are the shapes that they want you to recall and use and modify. Well, you know, you can do that in this three-dimensional world as well. Extended primitives, primitive objects that have more complex shapes. Look at those real quick. Helixes and things of that nature. Hedras. Spindles. Compound objects, which are more complex objects here. Lofting is one of the morphing, or two of the things that you'll be using. Boolean, which is more Boolean shapes, or if you add two shapes together, you can either get subtractive with them or you can get additive with them. In other words, you can subtract a certain shape from another shape. That'd be the best way to, I guess, explain that. Particle systems, rain, snow. Patch grids are 2D surfaces. NURBS, you know, complex surfaces that allow for complex surface deformations. You can go back in and, you know, start out with something pretty simple and end up altering it by manipulating the different vertexes and things like that. And doors, which are just what they sound like they are. They're architectural type doors. Windows, same thing. Mental ray, that's something that will allow you to render a little easier. You know, you start to get into this mental ray settings. You know, it can take a while if you get a complex model to render. Now, this will enable you to save some time. AEC, extended, more architectural elements. See there. Then, let's see, dynamic objects. Objects that have forces like springs and stuff. And stairs, which are architectural. So we'll be talking a little bit about those and concentrating on that. Now, whenever you create, let's start with the basics. When you create a standard primitive, you start out, say, in this case, we'll create a cube. Here you can click your move icon and change all these to zeros. And that will place it right dead square in the center or wherever you want to. But this is how you position it. And of course, basically these objects are broken down into these categories under the parameters where you've got length, width, height. Of course, you can create more and more segments, and that depends. Those are only valuable if you're going to create a mesh and modify that mesh into something that isn't a cube anymore. But something that maybe is close to a cube. Of course, you can, once you create this, you've got your name and color here. You can have it assign random colors or assign it your own color. Assign it your own name, whatever is appropriate. But it's good to assign names to things so that when you do start getting to have more and more things on your desktop, you can always remember, oh, well, I called that such and such, instead of having box 1, box 2, box 3. Again, spheres are defined slightly differently. They're defined with radii, or a radius. And again, the positioning is almost very similar. Of course, if you place this at 0, 0, 0, it'll put its dead center from the center of the sphere in the middle. You'll probably always want to have that fall more on the ground plane, like so. You can see I've got my snaps on here. I've got my 3D snaps toggle, and I'm going to go ahead and cut that angle toggle, which will allow me to rotate items. And when I rotate them, they can snap to whatever I want them to snap to. You can see that in snapping, when that line is green, it's telling me that it's snapping to a legitimate coordinate. When it's yellow like that, it's telling me that it is not a legitimate snap coordinate based on what I had defined over here. Grids and snaps. This is one way of getting to it. All the definitions of what I'm trying to tell it to snap to. Options. Of course, I've got the angle of any sort of rotation so that it'll snap to 5 degrees. You can set it to whatever you want, 45 if you want, 90 degrees if you want. Here are some of your different options that you can set snap rate to. You can also right click on these and it'll give you the same options. You may want to have this additional snap toolbar that you can quickly access. You can gain that by right clicking here and creating, selecting snaps, or I think you can go to customize here, and floating toolbars will bring up a whole bunch, but you can get rid of all of them but the snaps, but that's another way of doing it. Precision tools. You'll want to also know that when you start, before you even get this far, when you're at the very beginning of your modeling, you'll want to create, set up your units system, whether it's metric, feet and inches, or what have you. It's, the generic is just 1 to 1, which I think right now we're not scaling to anything other than we're just creating a 1 to 1 type of model, so I'll keep it there. I think if you're used to a lot of if you also hold your shift key and right click, you'll see that you have some additional snap tools here. Grid and snap settings you can go to from here as well. And these work exactly like they do in AutoCAD, except when you select this 3D button, it's going to work in 3 dimensions. If you choose the 2D button, it'll only work on the plane here. If you choose the 2.5, it'll work on the plane plus any sort of construction line that you have created that extends from, you snap it from this plane up, it'll snap to that as well. So that's something to know about those buttons. This percent snap tool is something to keep in mind if you are scaling something. So if I click that and I click this, and okay, that's where I'm picking it. Okay, so if I do that, it's going to snap at whatever the settings I have set. I think in that particular case, you're better off going here and setting your on something like that. It's just more precise than dragging. I don't really kind of ignore that one, but it's there in case you want to use it, and it will snap to however you've got it set here. It's going to snap at 10% in 10% increments. You can enable axis constraints. In other words, you can constrain your modifications, say movement, to your x-axis. Your y-axis. It's not going to let me do it on the x-axis for whatever reason. Your x-axis. You see, it's not going to let you do it any other way. See? Or even your z-axis. Or you can combine axes that you want it to move along. In this particular case, I've got it set to ZX, so it'll move either along the Z or the X. Wait, I lost it. Here. That's XY, so that'll allow me to move along either the X or the Y axis. But, you know, I mean, you can use your views to do that. So, you know, in other words, if I want to just move it along my XY axis, if I'm in my front view, I can do that. I just wanted to move along my Z and Y axis, just get in my left view. You can do it either way, because it's not going to move it along your z-axis if your z-axis is pointing straight at you and you're in that particular view. Okay, that covers grids. Now let's look at helpers real quick. These helpers are kind of neat. We've got grids that we can create, some additional grids, and set. I want to create a grid there, and a grid increment, and length and width. I've got what I want there, just say I do, and I right click on that and activate grid. And all of a sudden that becomes my new construction grid. It sort of mutes down the home grid, because this is the grid I really want to see. This is the one I'm using to construct things off of. So there's a little trick there that's here. Helpers. The dummy is a box wireframe cube that allows you to create a parent out of it. Or you know, you can even use it for its pivot point, things like that. Just things that you want to put in there temporarily. The tape is for measuring. You can select gives you the measurement here. The point helper is just a single point that you could place along a line to actually snap to if you wanted to. The grid, again, we've discussed the grid a couple times, and you can just lay out a grid and lay out the increments, and the increments, again, would be based on whatever units you set up here, your units. And you can create a construction plan from this grid right here. The snap to it as well. The protractor allows you to measure angles between two objects. The compass, of course, will allow you to determine the direction potentially of the sun, so that when you're creating a view, and it's important as to where the sun rises and sets, it'll allow you to locate that with the compass. Container. The container actually helps you group objects so that for tracking purposes and for grouping purposes. The crowd helper acts as a command center for controlling crowd simulations in Character Studio. Character Studio is a set of components that provides a full set of tools for animating characters. That's if you start to get into animating characters. The delegate is a special helper object used to create crowd animation. It serves as a controller object for motion created by crowd objects and its behaviors. The crowd object controls a delegate or delegates whose motion can be imparted to a biped or other object. Delegates cannot be rendered. I think this is almost starting to get out of the scope of the course, but since we're here, might as well scratch the surface of these. Expose, transform helper exposes values of non-keyed objects for use in expressions and scripts. There, right there. Let's cover layers real quick, Mike. And layers are just, as you've probably gotten used to them, either in Adobe Photoshop or either AutoCAD, and you basically use layers in order to organize your scene. In this case, like objects would go potentially on the same layer, or you could put each individual object on its own layer so that you can control them separately, but the layers you can turn on and off and freeze and all of that sort of thing so that you can control their appearance or lock them so that things can't be manipulated, and you just have to determine what it is that you're trying to achieve and how to set up your layers based on that. What would putting one thing on what advantage would putting one thing on its own layer be over grouping another set of things on another layer? That's what you have to take into consideration. Anyway, that's the end of chapter 6.